Real estate experts don't use the word crash more. They've learned that the word terrifies people and crashes markets faster, so they use softer language. Correction, market adjustment, normalization. But if you listen to what they're actually saying beneath the vocabulary, if you look at the data they're tracking, if you understand which cities they're quietly monitoring, what you hear is something far more serious. They're watching for a cascade, a moment when price declines in specific cities trigger broader panic, force a recalibration of housing values nationwide, and leave millions of Americans with assets worth significantly less than they paid. That moment may not be years away. It may be happening now. In 10 specific cities, conditions are aligning in ways that haven't happened since the last housing collapse. Here's what's particularly concerning. Most Americans don't realize these 10 cities are the leading indicators for the entire national market. When they move, the rest of the country follows. And right now, they're starting to move in a direction that makes experts very uncomfortable to discuss publicly. To understand where we're heading, you need to understand how housing markets actually work in America. It's not one unified market. It's a series of interconnected regional markets, each with its own supply and demand dynamic. But there are what economists call bellwether markets, cities that set the tone. When bellwether markets move, capital moves with them. When bellwether markets show weakness, broader weakness follows. For the last 5 years, the bellwether markets were the boom towns: Austin, Phoenix, Tampa, Denver, Charlotte, Miami. These were the cities where everyone was moving, where prices were appreciating fastest, where the narrative of the future of America was written daily. If you wanted to understand where American migration was heading, where young people were relocating, where remote workers were settling, you looked at these cities. Real estate is fundamentally driven by narrative. People believe in a place, move there, prices rise, more people believe in it, more people move, prices rise faster. It becomes self-reinforcing until it isn't. Then the narrative breaks. People stop believing, migration slows, prices stop appreciating, then prices start falling. And everyone wishes they'd paid closer attention to when the narrative was breaking. That's where we are now with these 10 cities. The narratives are breaking. The bellwether markets are showing weakness, and the rest of the country is starting to notice. Let's talk about what's actually happening. The data from early 2026 is telling a story that contradicts everything we've been told about these markets for 5 years. Austin. The narrative was tech migration and remote work paradise. Prices nearly doubled between 2020 and 2022. Now, prices are down 15% from peak. Inventory is piling up. New construction that was supposed to sell in weeks is sitting for months. Jobs in tech are actually declining as companies rationalize their Austin expansion and call people back to headquarters. The remote work narrative that justified the migration is collapsing. Phoenix, supposed to be the affordable alternative to California, became a speculator's playground and a retirement destination simultaneously. Prices peaked, fell sharply, and now show signs of stabilizing at much lower levels. But stabilization means acceptance that the appreciation narrative is over. Investors are exiting. Construction is slowing. The affordability advantage is less real when you factor in lower salaries in Phoenix jobs compared to coastal equivalent, Tampa and Jacksonville, the young professional haven, the places where you could rent for $1,200 and buy a home for $350,000. Prices surged on that narrative. Now both cities are seeing double-digit declines from peak. The migration wave that seemed inexhaustible has exhausted itself. The people who wanted to move already moved. Now you're left with building supply that was speculatively built for a migration wave that's already happened. Miami, the luxury destination where international wealth and domestic investment converged. Condo prices in particular are showing real weakness. Buildings that were supposed to command premium prices are struggling to fill units at any price. The inventory of unsold condos is building, and when condo markets peak, they fall harder than single-family markets because the buyers were purely speculative. Denver, the mountain lifestyle narrative, the place where tech workers could have both career opportunity and outdoor lifestyle. Prices held up longer than other secondary markets, but they're starting to crack. The job market that justified the prices is weakening as companies pull back hiring and reconsider remote work policies. Then there's Boise, Las Vegas, Reno, and parts of California outside the traditional coastal wealth centers, all showing similar patterns. Strong price appreciation from 2020 to 2022, peak decline. The declines aren't uniform, but they're consistent in direction. And here's what makes this moment particularly significant. These aren't isolated price corrections in individual cities. This is a coordinated narrative breakdown across all the cities that drove the post-pandemic housing boom. And when bellwether markets all move in the same direction simultaneously, it signals a phase shift in the broader market. Why is this this happening? What changed so fundamentally? Interest rates. That's the immediate answer. The Federal Reserve raised rates from near 0 to 7% in an 18-month period. That's the sharpest rate increase in 40 years, and it completely changed housing affordability. A $500,000 home at 3% interest is manageable for a middle-class family. At 7%, it's not, full stop. But it goes deeper than rates. Remote work, which was supposed to be permanent, turned out to be temporary for most people. Companies called people back to offices. The flexibility that justified moving to Austin or Tampa disappeared. People made geographic decisions based on temporary conditions. Now they're stuck. Pandemic savings are depleted. The stimulus checks, the unemployment supplements, the deferred spending, it's all gone. Consumer finances are fragile. Credit card debt is at all-time highs. Student loans restarted. The financial buffer that enabled risky purchases is gone. Migration patterns normalized. After 5 years of intense movement from coastal cities to secondary markets, the migration wave naturally exhausted itself. You can only pull so many people from New York before you run out of people who want to leave. And once you run out, the reason for price appreciation in the destination cities disappears. Speculation peaked and is reversing. Speculators and institutional investors flooded into these cities because they saw price appreciation. When appreciation stopped, they sold. Not patiently, aggressively, because they have no emotional attachment. They just want capital deployment elsewhere. And underneath all of it is a demographic reality. Younger generations have less wealth than older generations had at the same age. Student debt, lower wage growth, less intergenerational wealth transfer. Fewer young people can make down payments. The demographic engine that powered housing demand for decades is weakening. Now let's talk about actual people, because that's where this matters. Consider James and Sarah, both 38, solid middle-class careers. They sold their home in Boston in 2021 for $650,000 and bought in Austin for $750,000 with a 2.9% mortgage rate. They felt smart. They were part of the Great Migration. Escape expensive Boston for lower-cost Austin. Remote work meant they didn't even need to find new jobs. Their home is now worth $635,000. They're underwater by $115,000. Not foreclosure territory. They can still make payments, but they're not building equity anymore. They're slowly paying off a mortgage on a depreciating asset. Again, James just got a call from his Boston employer asking him to return to the office 3 days a week, which means the remote work flexibility that justified the move is gone. Now, James faces a choice. Try to keep the Austin home, rent it out, and commute to Boston 3 days a week. Or sell, take the loss, and move back. Either option is a financial wound. He's not in crisis, but he's in a situation where a decision that felt brilliant 3 years ago now feels like a serious mistake. Then there's Linda, 61, who retired and moved to Tampa in 2021 with $500,000 from a home sale. She bought a condo for $380,000 and invested the rest. The condo was supposed to appreciate her retirement security, her legacy, her downsized play in her 70s. The condo is now worth $335,000. Her retirement security just evaporated by $45,000. She's not in immediate crisis. She can still afford to live there, but her retirement math is broken. The assumption that her condo would hold value or appreciate was wrong. She's now facing the choice to either stay in a declining asset or sell and move to somewhere with more stability. Neither choice feels good. Or take Marcus, who bought 4 single-family homes in Phoenix between 2020 and 2022. He spent $1.8 million thinking appreciation plus rental income would create generational wealth. Rental income is solid, but his properties have lost nearly $300,000 in aggregate value. He's no longer building wealth. He's managing losses. Every month he holds, the equity pool shrinks. He's considering selling to cut losses, but selling locks in the loss. Holding requires faith that prices will recover. That faith is harder to maintain when you're bleeding equity month after month. He's stuck between 2 bad choices, which is exactly where thousands of real estate investors in these 10 cities are right now. These aren't theoretical people. These are millions of households trapped by decisions that made perfect sense in 2021 and 2022, but now feel catastrophic. The individual pain is real, but the systemic risk is what keeps experts up at night. When home values fall across multiple major metropolitan areas simultaneously, when millions of people simultaneously realize their biggest asset is depreciating, when that realization spreads through the entire country, behavior changes. Consumer spending contracts. People become financially conservative. They defer large purchases. They reduce investments. They pull back. Consumer spending is 70% of the American economy. When home prices fall, home equity extraction stops. People can't borrow against appreciated homes anymore. That flow of credit, which has funded consumption for years, disappears. And when consumption contracts, businesses contract. Jobs appear. In these 10 cities specifically, construction sectors boom when prices rise. When prices fall, construction halts. Builders go bankrupt. Contractors are laid off. The multiplier effect works in reverse. The city that was building its future 5 years ago is now shrinking payroll. Tax bases contract. Property taxes fund schools, police, infrastructure. When home values fall, tax revenue falls. Cities that were expanding services now cut them. Schools lose funding. Infrastructure maintenance gets deferred. Services decline. Yet the narrative of these being the cities of the future reverses entirely. Mortgage delinquencies spike when home values fall below mortgage balances, especially when unemployment is rising. We're setting up those conditions now. Employment in these 10 cities is still relatively stable, but it's weakening. If employment declines accelerate, delinquency rates will spike, creating a downward spiral. And here's what most people don't understand. Once that spiral starts, it's hard to stop. When enough people become delinquent, lenders have to foreclose. When there are enough foreclosures, supply increases dramatically. When supply increases, prices fall faster. Faster falling prices create more negative equity. More negative equity creates more delinquencies. More delinquencies create more foreclosures. It becomes a cascade. We're not in that cascade yet, but the conditions that create it are present. Here's what makes this particularly dangerous for the broader market. These 10 cities aren't just real estate markets, they're bellwether markets. When they move, capital and narratives move with them. For 5 years, the narrative was secondary cities are the future. Migration to secondary markets is inevitable. Coastal cities are dying. This narrative justified billions in real estate investment, venture capital deployment, corporate relocation, and individual migration. It became consensus. It became the future. But narratives break, and when they break, they don't break gently. People who believed in the narrative start questioning it. That questioning turns to concern. Concern turns to exit. Exit turns to panic. Panic turns to crash. The signs of narrative breaking are visible now in these 10 cities. The question is whether the break stays contained in these cities or spreads nationally. If it spreads, if investors start questioning whether other secondary markets are also overvalued, if migration momentum shifts again toward high-cost coastal cities, the broader real estate market could experience significant disruption. This doesn't mean prices crash nationwide. Coastal markets are more insulated because supply is genuinely limited and demand is still strong. But it means the appreciation narrative reverses. It means home prices nationally moderate or decline for years. It means the assumption that housing always goes up gets tested and breaks. Here's something counterintuitive that most people miss. This actually creates opportunities, even as it creates pain. And prices falling in major cities creates real value for people with capital. If you can wait 18 months, watch these markets stabilize, and buy when prices bottom, you can acquire real estate at 20, 30, 40% below peak prices. That's generational wealth opportunity, not in the cities showing the strongest declines necessarily, but in the markets adjacent to them, or in the subsequent wave of secondary cities that become the next destination for migration. The cities that see the most pain are the ones that relied most on speculative appreciation. The cities that will thrive are the ones with strong fundamentals. Job growth, population growth, reasonable affordability, strong schools. There's a difference between a city that's speculative and a city that's fundamentally strong but temporarily overvalued. That distinction matters enormously. So what should you actually do with this information? If you own in one of these 10 cities and you're considering selling, the window to exit with minimal damage is closing. The longer you wait, the worse the deal you'll get. Selling now, even at a loss, is often better than holding and hoping for appreciation that may not come for a decade. If you're considering buying in these cities, don't. Wait 18 months minimum. Watch for stabilization signal. When prices stop falling month after month, when inventory starts to tighten, when job growth reaccelerates, that's when you consider buying. Don't catch falling knives. Let them hit the ground first. If you're in a high-cost market watching this happen elsewhere, recognize that these patterns eventually spread. Not immediately, but they do. Don't assume your market is immune. Evaluate whether your local market has the fundamentals to support current prices, or whether it's also riding a speculative narrative. If you're renting and you've been considering buying, pause. Let this phase play out. Rent, build capital, watch. There's no rush. You're not going to miss the opportunity of a lifetime. You're going to miss the last days of a bubble, which is exactly what you should do. The housing market is entering a phase that most Americans haven't experienced in their adult lives. Not 2008 level catastrophe, but genuine sustained decline in major metropolitan areas. The 10 cities watching right now are the leading edge. They'll experience the most pain, but they're also the laboratories for understanding what comes next for the rest of the country. Experts are watching these cities carefully because they understand that housing cascades start slowly and then accelerate. Early warning signs in bellwether markets become full-blown crises and secondary markets become national recessions. That progression isn't inevitable, but it's possible. And it's possible in ways we haven't fully accounted for yet. The next few months and years will determine whether this phase stays contained in 10 cities or spreads nationally. That's not certain. But the conditions are present. The narratives are breaking. The data is showing weakness, and the people trapped in these markets are starting to understand that the assumptions they built their financial lives around are wrong. If you see the pattern early, you can position yourself to weather it. If you don't, you'll be reacting to it years from now when your options are much more limited. The time to pay attention is now, before the cascade accelerates, before the narrative fully breaks, before the cities that were supposed to be the future become cautionary tale. The housing crash may start in these 10 cities. It may stay there, or it may spread. Either way, understanding what's happening now in these specific places is essential to making good decisions about your own financial future. Because housing markets don't move in straight lines, they cycle, and we're entering a different cycle than the one we've been in for the last 5 years.